One of the most impactful exercises she had me go through was to write down every single job I ever had, every chore I ever had, every place I volunteered. What did I like and dislike about all those different pieces? At the time I was going through all this exercise, I was thinking in my mind, okay, go back to the corporate world, but I'm just going to work on my next certification. When I got through that exercise, I learned some really substantial things about myself. I had needed to return to something that allowed me to build relationships with people. I needed to get back to serving people.
In a corporate world where all employees have great leaders with no egos that create fun cultures where people can do their best work, the employees and companies thrive while doing great things for the customers, themselves, and each other.
Well, we know that rarely happens. I'm Jeff Palacio. I have been a leader for over 40 years for every t-shirt size company, from small 16 employees to extra large over 1 million. Please join me while I interview outstanding leaders that will share stories of great leadership and not so great. It will help you become a better leader while poking fun about all the crazy shit that happens in corporate America.
Hi, I'm Joe Deshawn, and welcome to the Corporate Couch with Jeff Palacio. Today, Jeff is interviewing Jennifer Rome. Jennifer is currently a mortgage advisor for Fairway Independent Mortgage Corporation, and she is the co-founder and president of a local nonprofit called the Giving Professional KC. She has an extensive and varied career, starting as a dental hygienist, later working as a business analyst and project manager in a variety of industries. Jennifer is also a breast cancer survivor and is writing a book, working on a podcast, and is preparing for public speaking engagements about her experiences. Let's listen as Jeff talks to Jennifer.
Jennifer, welcome to the Corporate Couch.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. I'm so excited to be a part of your show.
Yeah, no, it's great. Full disclosure, Jennifer and I were in Kay Blonde's weekly coaching, business coaching, I'll say a little bit life coaching group. I think you still participate. Is that correct?
I do.
Yeah. No, I think Kay's great. I did that for about a year, and she really crystallized a lot of things for me. So she's great. So yeah, I'm very excited to talk to you. I think your career's been amazing. You started as a dental hygienist, went into corporate America, worked for some great companies in Kansas City, and then had some things going on personally and health-wise, and COVID hit, lost your job, and then basically went out on your own in the mortgage business under Fairway Mortgage umbrella, but and then started a not-for-profit. So amazing. So we're going to dig into all that.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been an interesting journey, just kind of a step at a time, and it's taking on change is a beautiful thing. So
yeah,
I wouldn't go back and change anything.
Yeah, no, and you've done a lot of it, so that's great. So I like to start with some fun questions, though. One, we've been in the Zoom environment here for 3+ years because of the pandemic and COVID. Any crazy attire you've seen on a professional Zoom call, or lack of attire?
No, what's interesting is that, had I been in the corporate world, I bet, traditional corporate world, I probably would have seen that. But I actually was out and about trying to get my mortgage business established. So I was out meeting people for coffee and on phone calls, and very few Zoom calls, believe it or not.
Well, yeah. So tell us a little bit. I know you grew up in Kansas City, but as a child, what did you love doing?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'm an artist at heart, believe it or not. I very much love photography, decorating. So I was one of those young kids who always was doing something in my bedroom with the wall or with trinkets and all sorts of things like that. And then I also was, I will say I'm a consummate cheerleader. I absolutely love to cheer other people on. And so I was in cheerleading from, second or third grade and on for the next several years. So that was quite fun as well.
Now I have to ask, can you do still do a split, backflip, any of that good cheerleading stuff?
No, in fact, I just had surgery on my hip for well, so when I was in cheerleading, they always had me on the left side of the squad because I could kick that leg a lot higher. And I never really thought about the reasons why. Well, I learned after tearing my labrum in my right hip that I have what's called an impingement. So that explains why I could never fully do the splits and I couldn't kick
Oh,
my right leg as high.
oh, jeez.
So it's all fixed now. And now I'm convinced in midlife I'm going to get to a place where I can do splits and all that.
There you go. But you were not a flyer. I'm limited on my
No.
knowledge of cheerleading, but I know uh, there's the kind of the lightest person or whatever is the flyer.
Yes, I was always one of the tallest, so I was always a base, and I
There you
got
go.
to launch the flyers into the air and then catch them, it was just as fun.
Yeah, I definitely, if I was a cheerleader, and I would definitely be a base if they have males as bases. I don't know, but so growing up, what did you want to be when you became an adult?
That's a really hard question to answer. I don't know that as a young child I really thought about it. I know that I knew I was intelligent, always got good grades. I cared about people. My mother was a nurse, so I considered that for actually considered it off and on through even my adult years. But I think that I ultimately decided that I wasn't sure I was crazy about the hours and lifting patients and things of that sort. So, but I think I always just had people in mind no matter what I did. And at one point in high school, I took very seriously a couple different routes, and neither did I end up pursuing. One was interior design, and then the other was actually going on to art school. In fact, my senior year, I had a whole art portfolio put together, was starting to apply for art institutions, and then just decided that, or I'm sorry, I started applying for art institutes and realized how expensive they were and ultimately decided I might need to take a little more practical path. So now I do art for fun.
Oh, there you go.
So
When you graduated high schoal, did you go right into, you said, oh, I'm going to be a dental hygienist? Because I know that was part of your journey.
yeah, so I didn't. I went to KU my very first semester, and I was always kind of driven, pretty independent. So I wasn't afraid to go to school, but I was paying for my own college. So as I got to KU, that first, I put a lot of pressure on myself, honestly. And I got there and I was a semester in, and I just could tell how much it was going to cost. I wasn't sure I wanted that personal investment, all those loans looming over me. And so I worked with their career center and started doing different aptitude tests and interest tests. And, then they come back with all these careers that you might consider. And I was always curious about the dental field, but that test kind of came back and it was one of those careers that, was kind of top of the list. And so I thought, oh, okay, let's just go see, if it's even an option. And Johnson County Community College had an amazing program, 2 years, and you're out working. And from a very practical sense, at that time in my life, it was more important for me to feel like I could get out, get established in a career, not have the loans and that type of thing looming over me, and then kind of decide from there what was next. And so that's basically what I did. I stayed in the field for 9 years, and then I think about year 5 or 6, I started to kind of get the itch to do something different. And so I only had an associate's degree at the time. And so I thought, okay, well, let's go back and get a degree as a working adult. That was at a time when there were very few adult education programs. Baker had a great program that still allowed me to work full time and then take classes at night. And so I ultimately did that and got a bachelor's in business administration. And started to kind of make a shift from there.
Yeah, so what was the urge like, and I know a little bit about dental hygiene, hygienist. My wife was one for 20 plus years, and now she's in the corporate world today. But like, did you say, I want more? What was the urge?
There were a few different things. From a practical sense, I could tell that my hands and my neck and back were not going to handle the career of full time for the rest of my life. And so, I loved patient care. I just, I knew wasn't going to be in dental hygiene from that perspective. Then secondly, dental hygiene, I mean, it is fantastic work, but it also is very kind of rote. It's the same thing every day. And, as I got into it, I started to learn about myself that I like change. I almost thrive in taking on new challenges and learning. Like one of my highest aptitudes, I don't know if you've ever done the Gallup, is it called Strengths Finder?
Yes.
Like my top skill is learner. So I very quickly I just started to kind of get restless. And so that was another piece of it. And then the third piece was that I started to figure out I wanted a little more flexibility in my day. When you're in patient care, your schedule's set, and it's set 6 months in advance. And so there are some limitations there that I started to I didn't want to get to a place where I resented it. I wanted to kind of accept that, the field was the way it was. It was great. It served its purpose, and kind of use it as a launching pad into the next thing.
Yeah, so you do that. I really want to ask you who was the craziest patient you ever had and what did they do? But if you want to answer that one, you can, or we'll move on.
Oh, goodness. I love people, so I don't know if I could really say anyone's. Well, I will say this: I was invited on an international trip with a patient.
Okay.
Had to quickly shut that one down. So that was probably the craziest experience.
That story will be at the Corporate Couch special After Dark edition podcast episode coming up here next month. No, kidding. Then you get a job. You go right. You're a hygienist. You get your degree at Baker, and you go to Argus Health Systems. So tell us, how did you get that job? I mean, all you have on your resume is basically, a 10-year career as a hygienist. So that's great that you navigate into, Argus, I believe at that time was part of DST. So, really good company.
Yes. So a couple pieces there. Number one, I had the pleasure of serving for a well-known pediatric dentist in the area. And well, back up for a second. So first of all, my former spouse was a software engineer. So his social circle was a lot of people who worked in the corporate world. My social circle was not, but we just started kind of putting out there, hey, I'm getting my degree, I'm exploring options. One of his connections worked at Argus Health Systems. And then the second piece of it is that, he basically submitted my resume, and I was kind of pigeonholed into certain like low end customer service jobs. I don't think there was an understanding of really kind of the qualities that make up a dental hygienist. And so through some networking and help from a specific person that was at Argus Health Systems, they ended up getting my resume over to a special team called the Pharma Group. And the Pharma Group specifically worked with smaller copay assistance type programs. And the woman who led that team happened to be a parent of some of the children at the pediatric dentist's office. So when she saw where I worked, she immediately kind of put two and two together, and she was like, I want to interview her. And so the rest is history. She and I are still great friends, and I owe a lot to her.
I love that story because, it's how you treat people no matter what profession you're in. And it's not that you want it to lead to something, but you just want to do the right thing and treat people with respect and kindness. And, you have that caring mentality. that's why you went into the healthcare profession, and your mom was a nurse and all that type of thing. So it takes a special type of person to do that. But what's interesting, I think, when I look at your career, is like, okay, you just talked about applying for Art Institute, because your creative side, whether it's interior design or photography or things like that, and then you go into the healthcare profession, and then when I look at your career, you're doing a lot of IT liaison, project management, technical things, your Oracle, NetSuite, ERP. So how did you tell me, how did you get in? I mean, you got into it because of Argus, but you're in this field now that's very technical, detailed oriented, less creative, I would say. But tell us that story.
Yeah, and there's a lot of truth to that. I think because I am detail oriented and I have aptitudes in kind of math, logic type things. I always loved the sciences. So all of that was kind of natural. So, as clients asked questions or as managers needed information, I was never afraid to just get into the database. I started learning like SQL just because I wanted to be able to answer my own questions. I didn't want to be dependent on somebody else. I wanted to kind of be like a jack of all trades. And the other thing with the team that we were on, it was like this small little, we always said we were the redheaded stepchild because it was a small little group that really wasn't a part of Argus's core business. It's grown quite a bit, and now it has a bigger presence. But because we were small, we didn't always get the attention that, say, a big client would get, and so we had to be savvy and problem solve. And so I kind of fell into it. And then I had a teammate who was very technical, and so she taught me a lot, and then that just kind of snowballed into other opportunities at other companies. And I'm always one to grow and learn and change, and I want to understand. I feel strongly that I can be a better proponent and a better I can provide better service if I understand. And so I'm not afraid to jump into details.
So your need for change and learning, is that what led you? I think you had almost maybe around a 4-year run at Argus to make you move on to your next experience at the NAIC, National Association for Insurance Commissioners.
Yeah, it was at that point, they had a few rounds of layoffs, and I, again, was kind of getting the itch to do something more, to get exposed to more. And I kind of felt like, okay, maybe it's time to go check out another company. So what I learned, NAIC was great. I almost jumped in that experience. I learned a lot. Like I needed to do more due diligence and asking more questions during the interview process, because what I learned is that I was jumping into a very technical role, and they were very attracted to the fact that I knew a bit about SQL. I could get into the database, and I loved getting into databases to design reports and things of that sort. They needed a little bit more than that, more like database administration type work. And so quickly figured out that that was probably not going to be for me long term. But again, it was a great experience. I walked away learning even more of, databases and systems and how everything plays well together.
Well, and you didn't have much interview experience, probably. I mean, interviewing for a dental hygienist job is not the same as interviewing for, Seabird or Argus or, some of the other places you've worked. What was the most fun experience? But what was that one experience, or it could be 2 experiences that really shaped you professionally from your corporate career?
One of the biggest ones was working for, they're now a part of Abbott Health Systems, but it was eScreen. When I worked there, they were eScreen. They were eventually purchased by Alere. And The woman I worked for, that was another opportunity where just based on my background, they took a chance on me. And she was a phenomenal leader, because she just trusted me from day one. And she had this keen ability to really explain how systems work, but why we needed them to work from a business perspective. So she was able to translate business value and then follow that all the way through to the technical side. And so what was fantastic is that under her leadership, I was empowered to really go be a strong partner with some of the VPs and different business leaders within the company to either enhance or, to design different things within the system. And I really became a trusted partner with them, and in fact still stay in touch with a couple of them. So she was pretty pivotal to me because I wasn't like staying in one lane and just focusing on maybe solving something in the moment. She helped me to kind of broaden and look at things from vision, business value, and things of that sort. And she's also the person who encouraged me to get my project management professional certification. So I think fondly of her.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And I love, you can tell you're a learner because, again, you get your PMP certification and, learning SQL, doing data mining, business analyst type thing. I'm curious about Seaboard is the biggest privately held company in Kansas City. I can't remember what's the number before the billion in annual revenue, just off the top of my head. But I don't meet many people that have worked there. So I know you worked there, 10, 11 months, but what was that experience like?
That was a very interesting experience. I mean, that to be a part of, Fortune, at the time they were a Fortune 500 company. I don't know if they still are. I was brought in, actually, this woman I just spoke of connected me with the CIO at the time because they were bringing on a new ERP system and they needed somebody who was strong at building relationships. And so, I was invited in, and it was most of my experience. Well, Argus, eScreen, which was where I had spent the most of my time, and then obviously dental field. I wouldn't say those are women dominated areas, but there was much more of a mix of men and women. The dynamics, the gender dynamics were more neutral, I guess you could say. I definitely could tell I was walking into an environment that had primarily been run by men, and it was just different. It was it took me a bit to figure out how to, where to fit in, how to maybe communicate a little bit differently. But I found a success in several teams, and building relationships, and so it was a good experience. So I learned a lot about ERPs, and I learned a lot about the pork industry. So
There you go.
yeah, I mean, you don't think about your food sources, but it was a pretty interesting 10 or 11 months that I was there. So
Yeah, it's interesting because I work for Bayer Crop Science, manufacturing of, herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, all this good stuff, which I rarely knew anything about, but just didn't really have to as a marketer. No, I'm kidding. But it was a very male-dominated industry for sure. I mean, I would say, I can't remember how many sales reps we had at a time, but I would say at least 90% were male, and a lot of the executives, senior level C-suite were male. So
yeah, and I didn't really, I hadn't really thought about it going into it. I don't know that I understood that there would be a difference, but I quickly saw the difference, and it didn't make me uncomfortable at all because I'd worked with a lot of software developers, so I was used to working with men or women. But I think just culturally, maybe there were, a few differences. Like, I'd always had a little more flexibility. I had young kids at the time, and I had a lot more flexibility in previous roles to kind of try to manage my work around some of that. And I think Seaboard was, they were pretty traditional in that in that regard. So a little harder to manage life.
Right.
So
And that,
good
yes,
company.
yeah, no, it's strange because it's big, in terms of annual revenue, and I think it's the biggest private held company in Kansas City, but it's just, I hardly know anyone that works there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
um, so you went to Children's International for a bit. Was that an intentional move to go to a not for profit?
Not necessarily to go to a nonprofit specifically, but I think with my experience at Seaboard, it got me further and further away from businesses where you're like caring for people or doing something, like something I was somewhat familiar with. And so there was a lot of change in leadership at Seaboard, which was one of the driving reasons for me to leave so quickly. Is that made me, everyone who had hired me in was leaving. So I thought, okay, it's probably time to go. And so, yeah, this Children International opportunity came up, and I was immediately drawn to it because I thought, oh, I love people. I love giving to people. I love caring for people. Here's another flavor of caring for people and giving back and service. And, I'm very much into like service, service type of leadership. And so it just immediately kind of drew me to it.
What was the biggest change? I mean, you work for, Argus, all commercial type companies, not for profit. What was the biggest change or biggest surprise going from kind of the for profit companies to a not for profit?
Oh, goodness. There were a couple. Number one, they were an international nonprofit, and the team I was placed on they basically served our field offices around the world. So I was suddenly dealing with time zones. Some of the field offices, basically, they had mainly Spanish speaking employees and things like that. And I'm not bilingual. So we had to try to figure out, how do we manage through that? And there, we had a lot of bilingual resources, but there was a lot more logistics in like organizing a meeting and getting things documented. And we had time zone differences and all of those different pieces. And then the next piece, and I would say one of the reasons, project managers were there was that, and this is solely my impression, but my impression was that they just kind of built things based out of need and addressing needs at the time. And they were getting to be big enough that infrastructure didn't necessarily work going forward. So they really, they were trying to bring in resources who could kind of get them out of that way of operating and get their systems more up to date and all of that. And so I was used to a more structured environment as far as just, getting things through the pipeline in an IT environment. You have requirements and you get those, you have like gatekeepers in a sense. You got to get everything prioritized and you write requirements, you get those requirements approved, and, it kind of follows this chain. And some of that existed, but not to the degree I was used to.
I'm going to let you tell the story, but and I may have the time frame hopefully about right. But so from 2019 through today, you underwent a major life changes. So kind of walk us through what was going on both personally and professionally starting in 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. I may even back up a little bit and go to 2018. So, after a time at Children International, I worked really hard for that company, and my kids were still young, and my spouse at the time was gone a lot. And I kind of just reached this place where I realized if I didn't make big changes that I just couldn't keep up the pace. The demands were too great. My youngest had some health problems that thankfully he outgrew them, but just many, many, many demands. And I decided, you know what? I think that maybe I'll start exploring uh, again another career, another change. And thankfully, because I had my PMP and I stayed in touch with a lot of people that I've worked with and for, and just started exploring what would it look like if I went back to school full time and use my project management experience to basically be a contractor. And so I actually left Children International to start a master's degree in school psychology, of all things, and I can explain why that was the route. And then I picked up a contract job with Hair You Wear, and which is a great company, privately held. They're located in Lenexa. I can't say enough wonderful things about them, but they brought me on to basically kind of help lead their internal team on an ERP project, and they were replacing their warehouse software as well. And so I would be partnering with these vendors to take to push the project along. And so I did that at the time, and school psychology, what I really was trying to solve for was, okay, how can I still bring in some sort of income, but maybe work a schedule more like my kids? I knew teaching was not for me. But my oldest was identified as gifted when he was in first grade. And what's fascinating about those kiddos is that, everyone thinks, oh, gifted kiddo, they're going to get through school swimmingly, like it's all going to be just easy peasy. But being gifted comes with its own challenges. And I, of course, being a learner, had already dove in and learned all these things about gifted kids. And I thought, well, maybe that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be helping children like my son, and then that'll create more balance in my life. And so, yeah, I started talking with an advisor, figured out a way to replace most, not all, but a good part of my income, enough that it wasn't going to be a detriment to my family. And yeah, took a leap of faith, started working on my master's full time, and Hair You Wear was fantastic. And then, it's fascinating because I'll be fairly transparent, as I am with most things in my life. I could feel an unraveling just internally, and got into therapy. And my therapist was like, you're hyper functioning. So I learned that, because I'm just a doer and a goer and a problem solver and all of that, I was just simply burning the candle at both ends. And I really needed to change that behavior. And so, interestingly enough, then I'm taking all of these master's level psychology courses at the same time for the school psychology program. And I think a lot of people get to late 30s, 40s, midlife, and they start to realize that maybe they haven't always dealt with certain things in their life or whatever. And I started to face some things that I had just denied as part of my life. And through that, I started to recognize that part of the challenge I faced was I didn't really have a partnership in my marriage. And because I'm I'm a nurturing person and I'm a caring person, I often give more than I ever ask for in return. And I just knew I was in a situation where those dynamics weren't necessarily going to change. And the only way for me to bring about that change was to start to confront some pieces of my marriage. And unfortunately, it didn't quite go the way I thought it would go. And so I quickly made the decision that it was time to file for divorce. So I did that in March of 2019. I'll probably refrain from getting into a lot of the details of the divorce, but I will just say it was extremely tumultuous. And so from a career perspective, I was still working on my master's degree full time, but I also returned to work full time. I immediately went to Hair You Wear, told them my circumstances, and they said, yes, we want you as an employee. And so I hired on full time there while I was still working on my master's degree and going through the divorce process. And I'd always been very proactive about my health. And so went in for my normal yearly checkup with my OBGYN, and they encouraged me strongly to stay on schedule with my mammogram. For me, I had what they call dense tissue, and dense tissue puts you at higher risk for breast cancer. And so I was like, oh, I need to put it off 6 months. And they were like, absolutely not. You have got to stay on schedule. And so I think I was due in August. So took my kids back to school and went in for my mammogram. Long story short, they found suspicious areas. I ended up having two different types. I had a biopsy and then a lumpectomy. Both showed high risk tissue for breast cancer, which ultimately led me to make a decision to have a preventative or an elective double mastectomy. And that's when I learned that I had breast cancer in both breasts, nearly stage 2 when found. And I call that was like a God nudge or a God whisper. Like, if I had not chosen mastectomy, I'm not sure I'd be here today. So, and so that was in December 2019. And, I just kind of thought, all right, let's just move on to the next thing. And my divorce was still not finalized. And I knew I could not, I just emotionally couldn't. At the time, they thought I needed chemo, and that's a whole nother story in and of itself, like my journey and kind of how they decided on my treatment plan for my cancer. But the first team I talked to wanted to put me right on chemo. And I thought, I can't have this divorce looming over my head while I've got this health crisis and all of that. And so I'm really pushed to get it finalized. And as part of finalizing it, it meant that I had to also leave my family home. And so I moved out of my family home just 3 days after my third surgery. So I had 3 surgeries in 10 weeks. And I moved in with my mom. I thought it was going to be for about a month while I was waiting to close on a new home purchase. And so that was in the month of March 2020. And basically about 4 days before I was set to close on that home, I was furloughed due to COVID. Unfortunately, Hair You Wear, they are in the cosmetic industry. They make wigs and hair extensions. And if you remember, the hair salons were some of the first businesses to be shut down. And so overnight, their business just completely dried up. And since I was considered an overhead expense, and they halted all growth related projects, I lost my job. So so it was quite the journey. But I look back now and I'm like, okay, I don't want to say everything happens for a reason, because that seems really dismissive to experiences that, for many people. But I look back now and I'm grateful for everything that happened, because everything that's happened since has just been positive in my life.
Yeah, I mean, I just you can't put yourself in anybody else's shoes, right? But I know, having undergone divorce myself, it's just a hard process, and mine was not tumultuous, but it weighs on you. Your work life suffers, your parenting, I believe, suffers. It's just a hard thing to go through, and then you layer on, obviously your cancer. I mean, and then a loss of a job because of COVID. How did you deal with all those major life things happening all at the same time?
I'm a crier, by the way. So if I break it down into tears, I
You will
just
not
know
be
that
the
that's
first
just
guest that has cried on this show. So
my therapist calls it. I'm an emoter, so yeah, I emote emotion. I'm not gonna lie, it was extremely trying. I look at it like any one of those, divorce is hard, breast cancer diagnosis is hard, job loss is hard, loss of a community in your home of 15 years, that's really hard. And it was a very fast decision. So there wasn't time to like prepare for that. And then it was COVID. So the normal support systems I would have had in place, like, hey, girlfriend, let's go to lunch, hey, my boy's grade school, I have some time to volunteer. None of those resources were there. And so at first I just was looking for anything to fill my time, because what I did know is that I'd had enough experiences growing up. I'm a product of divorce, and the reason I was in therapy is because I had some things happen, in my youth that I think just naturally I have this resiliency. So I knew I couldn't just like lay in bed and cry. I had these young men, my boys were 9 and 10, and they knew a lot of the circumstances of the change in our family unit, and I knew they needed me. So that number one was my biggest motivator, was my kids. I knew that in order for them to thrive, they needed to see me be strong. So so I did a lot of simple things. Like I always got out of bed every morning at the same time, and I got a puppy. I decided to get a puppy during all of this. Everybody thought I was crazy, and I'm sure there's a little bit of that in there, but I felt strongly like a puppy would offer my boys comfort. And I've learned that, yes, he has, but he was also comfort for me. He also made me get out of bed because I had to get outside, take him out every day. I took him for lots of walks. My boys and we went to the park a lot. Pokemon Go was a big thing. So we did Pokemon Go on the phones, like whatever we could do to get out of the house and just kind of keep things positive. And then I ended up being with my mom for a total of 19 months in order to make a lot of the life changes that I've made. So I also had a very strong example in my mother. I'd seen her do something similar years ago. And so I had an example to work from. And then I just have an incredible family unit, just a broader family unit, and an incredible network of friends and people who, I could call at a moment's notice and break down and, I break down, go through whatever I was going through. And I would say the other big thing is I read a lot of books, and I really dove into anything that dealt with mindset. So one of the most, well, there were probably two books that were extremely pivotal: Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning and Brene Brown's Braving the Wilderness. Those two books I kind of clung to. And so I would go on long walks with my headphones in and listen to those books over and over until I kind of got my fill of them. So it was a lot of like, I started mindset work long before I started working with Kay, but and so I tell people, like, I write a lot about my experience and talk a lot. I've told my story several times, and I always describe it as a very dark time. But now when I talk about it, I call it my white space, because, white is, bright and light, and it's a clean slate. I literally had a clean slate in front of me and was able to choose what I did next. And how often does a person get that experience or that opportunity in midlife? I don't know. I think we all get bogged down in all of our responsibilities. And, I had a little bit of a safety net to kind of, as long as I swallowed my pride and could, decide to live with my mom for as long as I did. But it offered me a launching pad to be able to really make some big changes. So it was a gift.
Yeah, no, I think it's amazing, and your resiliency and grit is, just phenomenal. I read Viktor Frankl's A Search for Meaning years ago. I occasionally would give it out to my team members, when they were stressed. I'm like, Work is not it shouldn't be stressful. It's not what you stand for as a person, right? If you think this is stressful, read about Viktor Frankl being in the Holocaust and in the concentration camps and things like that. So all these things happen. The divorce, which is not any divorce is not good, but yours is very crazy, I'll say, and then the cancer, the COVID, losing a job, and then you go into a whole different professional field. And I know you have to do something, right? Because now I don't know when the divorce is filed now, but you need your own income, and you don't have any because you got furloughed and laid off from a hair you wear. But what made you choose the mortgage profession?
Well, so part of what I did with that white space, or that, that time I was off, was to hire a career coach. And, at the time I was going through it, I was like, oh, this is a lot of work, but she had me do all these different exercises and they all had a purpose. But one of the most impactful exercises she had me go through was to write down every single job I ever had, every chore I ever had, every place I volunteered. What did I like and dislike about all those different pieces? And, at the time I was going through all this exercise, I was thinking in my mind, okay, go back to the corporate world, but I'm just going to work on my next certification, right? Like, that learner mindset. Okay, just grow with kind of what or whatever. And when I got through that exercise, I learned some really substantial things about myself. I learned, hey, I'm really organized. I've got an aptitude for, analytics. Yes. So I've kind of proven that. I needed to return to something that allowed me to build relationships with people. I needed to get back to serving people, like directly, kind of like I did as a dental hygienist. And so I knew that relationship piece was missing for me in the traditional corporate role. So there was that. And then just because of the demand in my personal life, I carry a genetic mutation that was a contributing factor to my breast cancer diagnosis, but it puts me at risk of 5 different types of cancer. So not only was I thrown into the healthcare system for my breast cancer, I was thrown into it for monitoring all these other things. And I had procedures to prevent cancer, and just, it was a lot. And I knew I actually had a job offer, but I hadn't disclosed anything I was going through personally. And I knew the reason they were attracted to hiring me was because I was kind of known as a workhorse. And I knew I couldn't be the workhorse I had been. Like, I needed to really focus on my family and all of that. So I needed something that I could shape around my life. I didn't, as I say to people often, no longer was I going to shape my work or my life around my work. I was going to shape my work around my life. And so, I had this offer sitting there, and I couldn't find a way to accept the offer. So I kind of went back. I went back through everything I had done with the career coach. And I guess it was even before I had the job offer, I started to just kind of explore. Like, she had said, okay, now that you know these things that are important to you in your work or in your life, because it was kind of overarching, it didn't include just career. She said, now go start meeting with people in these different industries. So I met with somebody in insurance, and my cousin's in the mortgage industry. And I just started talking with, people who've served in HR roles. And it was fascinating because my cousin, I really was starting to explore the mortgage piece pretty seriously. But I had a lot of trepidation about jumping from a 6-figure income to commission only. It was terrifying. And I had all these stories in my head about it, meaning I was not responsible, and I had to kind of get past a lot of those things. And the fascinating thing for me, and I think you and I have even talked about this, like, culture is really, really important to me. And my cousin sent me an email from our CEO that kind of changed the trajectory of everything. My cousin called and said, hey, I know you got a lot to think about. all of that. This is a big leap. I think you might actually really appreciate Fairway's culture. And I was like, okay, yeah, send me the email. Well, it was an email from our CEO. He started what he calls Keep Playing, and it is a daily practice of sending out an email, words of encouragement, mindset related type communication. And at that time, he wrote every single Keep Playing story every day. And so my cousin sent me this Keep Playing story. And I don't know if you're familiar with the author Andy Andrews, but it's a lot about mindset. His books there's The Bottom of the Pool, there's The Traveler's Gift, The Noticer. He's got some pretty phenomenal books. And I read that email and it talked about Andy Andrews and mindset. And I was like, you know what? I'm supposed to be taking this leap of faith. I am supposed to go to Fairway, and I'm supposed to kind of abandon all of the safety nets I've known previously and trust in myself and my ability to, make things happen for myself and go for it. So I ultimately was like, okay, I'm going to go get my license. And when can I start?
Yeah, and you and I share. I worked for Capital One in their home loan division for about 4 years, so I know a lot about what at least the mortgage industry was back in '05 through '09. But like, you've never had sales experience. So were you scared? Like, you always had these, project manager roles, IT, data mining, ERP systems. So what was your process to kind of become a salesperson?
Looking at the mortgage industry specifically, I knew we talked about the different roles available. And so I explored all of them. But, the safe route would have been to take more of an operational role or a support role. But the fascinating thing is, I like to consult with people before I make decisions if I'm uncertain. Some decisions I just know and I just go. Like my mastectomy, I had a lot of people trying to encourage me a different direction. And I was like, nope, we're doing double mastectomy. But some decisions I kind of sit on, I percolate, I have conversations with people. And there are a couple people in my life that were like, look, anything you've ever put your mind to, you've done well and you are fantastic with people. So why wouldn't you be successful? You're disciplined. You have all these great habits. Why not bet on yourself? And so I was like, well, okay, yeah, let's do it. And my mom had said, look, you and your boys are welcome here as long as you need. And so, I was pretty prideful. I didn't want to be there longer than necessary, but I thought it's now or never. If I don't try something significantly different now, I'm never going to. So that there was motivation there. And I think I did get to a place where I just knew that if I was always open to coaching, and Fairway has a lot of coaching. And so as long as I was always coachable, as long as I was willing to do the work, and as long as I kind of tackled everything fearlessly, just like I had with the other major decisions in my life, then it was going to be just fine. So, and I remember having a conversation with my cousin too, because he was like, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you've just been through hell and back. Like, you literally have just been through hell and back. Are you sure you want to do this? And he was like, you're going to have to make cold calls. You're going to have to meet people for coffee that you've never met before. And you're going to have to make conversation with them. And I just said, we're on the phone and I just said, Mark, I know that seems intimidating to some people, but considering everything I've been through, like, that's nothing. So yeah, I mean, I had to be coached. I had to be taught. Unless I wanted to go back to what I was doing before, I needed to change things up. And so it was now or never. It was do or die. It was succeed at this or go back to what I was doing before. And I just knew in my heart, I really, really needed to be able to shape my work around my life in order to avoid getting sick again. So So I had lots of motivation to make it work.
Yeah, no, I love your story. And Lori Seitz was a recent guest, and she does coaching. And what she said is people know what to do. You know, their gut tells them what to do. It's just the courage to do it. And just your courage is just phenomenal that you just jumped. I mean, all those different things. And then you jump into a brand new industry as well as a role you've never had before. What if there was one thing in sales that you could have been told earlier, you know, if you knew it earlier would have been more helpful? What would that one thing would have been?
I really wish as a young person, I would have networked or gotten to know more about sales because I didn't really understand. I always thought sales was pushing people into doing something that maybe they didn't necessarily want to do, or having to, kind of claw your way towards a paycheck. And I mean, the mortgage industry is competitive, that is for certain. But, what gave me faith, at least as a beginner, was that my cousin kept reminding me that it's all about relationships. It's all about relationships. So when I thought of it in that perspective, I was like, oh, well, it's just like dental hygiene. I, as a dental hygienist, was teaching behavior change, and I was teaching habits, and I was trying to influence my patients to take better care of their oral health. And I never did it in a pushy way, and I never did it in an over the top way. I always did it in a way where it was like, hey, I noticed this. And it was more of like a problem solver. And that problem solving mentality like carried me through all of my roles. And it's the same thing I lean on in this role now. It's like, okay, how am I going to stand out against everyone else? Well, what problems can I solve? What value can I offer? So it's really no different. It has a little bit different spin, but at the end of the day, it's no different.
Yeah, I love that answer. That's spot on. So now kind of things I'll say normalize a little bit. You've been in the industry about 3 years, a little over 3 years. But then you decide at some point, I think you launched in January 23. So this, 7 months, 6 months ago, you co-found a not-for-profit. Tell us about that.
In my line of work, there's a lot of networking that we do. You're always looking for ways of connecting with people, and back to building relationships. And, I think a lot of people probably choose to do that over golf or tennis or a happy hour. And I'm not a huge sports person. I'm more of a creative mind. I'm actually, believe it or not, a little bit on the introverted side. And yet I love people. So it's kind of an interesting combination. But I needed to find a different way of networking and connecting. And I needed to also find the people that were people like me in business. So very like servant-minded, people-minded, soft-hearted. And so I thought, okay, well, and I will say I had a little bit of experience. I organized a birthday party for myself in 2020. Was it 2022? 2021 or 2022 at Harvesters. I thought, you know what? Let's get all of my business partners together, and we're just going to go to Harvesters, and it's going to be my birthday party. But instead of doing anything that costs any money, we're going to be giving back. And the crazy thing is, I had more people show up to that with less effort put in to organizing and facilitating the whole event than any other event. And I thought, and it was so fun. And we all connected over giving back and hearing about the children. Like we were making packages of food that go home with kids in their school bags. So we all were just like, wow, let's see how fast we can work. How many of these kids can we, feed and serve? And so it was so much fun. And I left there with my cup so full. And I thought, okay, the market started to slow a little bit. I had a little more capacity. So I started reaching out to people that I knew were also civic minded and philanthropic and said, hey, I have this crazy idea. What if we started networking over like service projects? We just started organizing something. And they were like, yeah, let's do it. And so we kind of had a loose vision for it. And then we were just coming up with the name and the vision and the mission. And then I thought, oh, we're coming up on the fall. October is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And another project I'm kind of working on is a book. And I thought, oh my gosh, whenever I get this book done, which I don't have exact timelines yet, but whenever I get it done, I'm going to have to be able to talk in front of audiences about my book. But I'm terrified to talk in front of audiences. So I basically said to my friends, okay, what if we organize a breast cancer event, and it's mostly networking, but there's this fundraising element for breast cancer patients in the Kansas City area. And what if I'm the guest speaker, because I need to get over my fear of public speaking? And they were like, yeah, let's do it. So we thought it was going to be, 30 or 40 people coming together for this event. So we started to pull in other people to help us organize it. Long story short, just 55 days before the event, there were 6 of us that came together. We pulled off an event that I don't know what the word is. We pulled off an event with about 100 guests. We raised $16,000 before expenses, about $13,000 after expenses. And I mean, yeah, we had a few glitches, but really, honestly, it went pretty seemingly pretty seamlessly, I should say. So it was an unbelievable experience. And at that point, we still were going to kind of keep it informal. Like at that point, we were like, we don't need to make a nonprofit out of this or anything like that. We did run into some logistical challenges with fundraising because we had to fundraise on behalf of another nonprofit. And there were some people who were like, we can't donate to you because you're not a 501c3. Like that we were a conduit, but it made it more complicated. So we lost, some fundraising because we weren't a 501c3. And then I was also approached we ultimately donated money to Bra Couture KC. That's who we fundraised on behalf of. That founder came to me, and somebody from a fairly sizable corporation, an international corporation, came to me and basically said, you need to make this a nonprofit because you're onto something. And from a Bra Couture perspective, she looked at it more like, they do this huge gala that raises a lot of money. Usually there are little deeper pockets. With our nonprofit, it's called the Giving Professional KC. We're a little more grassroots. We're middle class who just has a love of service, and we want to come together and support each other and support our community and fundraise. It's a little bit different flavor, a little more kind of a grassroots feel, and a little more of, a lot of people coming together and maybe making a greater impact in the process. And then the corporate person basically just like, he knows there's money there, but until we have a 501c3, they can't give to us directly. But that spurred off conversations of, there are so many organizations that donate, or they allow their employees to donate like a day a quarter or a day a year to service. And so we're not there yet, but one of our 2024 initiatives will likely be to start to put something together to market to corporations so we can attract those individuals who want to take their 8 hours and serve somewhere. Like, we'll have it all organized. We'll have all the dates organized, the nonprofits lined out. They can just come see our event calendar, go pick a place that they want to contribute to, or they can get involved with us and our breast cancer event. So lots of options, but yeah, it's pretty fun so far to explore where we can take it.
Yeah, no, I just love the way you founded it and what you're trying to do with it. So I'd like to always help 2 groups of people. with my guest knowledge. So the first group is recent college graduates. So we're recording here July 6, 2023. Young adults just graduated in May. What advice would you give them, Jennifer, as they embark on their first professional job and their professional career?
Goodness, I would say do not be afraid to explore. I came from a family where there were, like, you went into a career and usually stayed in that career like your entire life. And I think I personally kind of, even with all my change, I always kind of carried with me like this thought of like, oh, there's something wrong with me if I change or whatever. I would say to my younger self or to anyone graduating, like, no, it's the opposite. Take the time to explore, take the time to really learn what's important to you in your personal life, in your career. Go network with people in different professions, ask a lot of questions. I think most of the professionals I know would be honored if a young person asked them to come talk with them and kind of explore options and to be a resource. So I would encourage that. And then I would also just encourage to, like, just always trust your gut, like trust your that internal voice rather than, maybe I think as young people, and I'm guilty of this anyways, I leaned very heavily on the experience of all of those around me. And they all have very valid experience, but it meant that my circle of influence stayed smaller, where if I had had the courage and even just the, kind of thinking outside of the box and had thought, like, I'm going to go seek certain people out and really explore this and invest time and energy, I think I probably would have discovered things about myself and where I was going in a career much earlier and saved myself, maybe changes so later in life. And not that there's anything wrong with change later in life.
Yeah, no, but I think, yeah, we're all on the life journey we're supposed to be on. But as we said earlier, trust your gut and have the courage to act on. I think is
Yes.
the message here. The other group I love to help is, so you start out of college, get a job, usually an individual contributor. Then you get that promotion, you're a manager now, or whatever it's called, and at various companies, you have people reporting to you. What leadership advice would you have for them as they embark on being a formal leader in the organization with people reporting to them?
So I love that question because I think we're making a shift, but I think leadership is often perceived one way. It's often perceived top down, and sometimes that is how it's administered, for lack of a better word. I've known enough great leaders now that the great leaders who invest in people first and taking care of people first are going to get a whole lot more out of their people and be able to serve their organization more fully than any other approach. So I would say, seek out Simon Sinek and anyone that speaks of or teaches servant leadership, like that style of leadership, I really think is here to stay. And I think, a new leader is going to find that's going to take them further, both personally and professionally as well.
Jennifer, you've been great. I love your journey. And like that sign says on the top of your bookcase behind you here on the Zoom call, the best is yet to come for you. I can't wait to see what you're going to be doing. So thank you for being on the Corporate Couch today.
Thank you for having me, Jeff. It's been a pleasure.
Joe, as you know, I love talking to all my guests, and I did spend a fair amount of time with Jennifer when we were both in K Blonde's weekly business/life coaching Zoom meeting we had every Thursday back in the day for about a year. But I mean, just you can go so many different ways with Jennifer. I mean, she's just great in terms of, her energy. And just from a career perspective, going 8-9 years in dental hygiene, pivoting to get, a job in the corporate world really in the tech space, and she was a learner. That's her biggest strengths finders. And she learned SQL and databases and analytics and data mining, got her PMP. And then she pivoted again, had never done sales, and then became a 100% commission loan officer at a time when you and I have both been divorced, and it's a difficult time, when you go through that process. And my divorce was not anything like hers. Hers was tumultuous, I think is the word. And I know a little bit more than that from, past conversations with her, but it was not a good time. And even the year before that, she said she was unraveling, seeing a therapist, getting her master's in psychology because she thought that was her career direction. And
all that going on at the same time.
Yeah, exactly. Having that mammogram and then getting a elective double mastectomy. Then they discovered while they were doing that, she had breast cancer in both breasts, having 3 surgeries in 10 weeks, losing her job right before she was going to close in 4 days on a house, and then starting this career in 100% sales. I mean, it's just mind-boggling.
It just sounds like a movie almost.
I know.
If you would have seen that in a movie, you would think, "Oh, come on!" Right?
And then she got a puppy during this time. And I'm like, and having had a puppy, well, now Jeter Jet Palacio is a little over 2 years old, but having a puppy takes a lot of work.
Takes a lot of energy. You stole one of the words that I was going to use that I'd written down, pivot, because that seems like that's what she had to do. She would go into a situation, X, whatever it was, and then find out that it wasn't exactly what she thought it was going to be, and so she had to pivot. And of course, the definition of the pivot means is you don't move forward, you just change directions and you start going the other direction, just as sure as you were going in the first direction in the first place. And that's about what she had to do. It's just amazing that apparently all of these pivots that she did was successful. There was the one, and I can't remember exactly which employer it was, but where she said that she went into the job and then found out that it was much more technical than what she had first been led to believe that it was going to be. So there's a lot more SQL in it, and there's a lot more computer stuff in it. So she just said, this is more technical than I thought. Okay, here we go. Pivot and start going that direction then. It's an amazing story. I would suggest that anybody needs to learn their own life lessons based on what she had to come up with.
Yeah, and I will say too, I think throughout, she just had the courage to do things that a lot of people would have not tried to do. It reminded me a lot about Tabitha Scott's journey that I think Tabitha was episode 4, but those two reminded me of a lot of each other.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
So what leadership advice based on the episode would you like to impart on our audience, Joe?
Oh, we're going to go to that great philosopher named Pam Beasley, where Pam once said, "I hate the idea that someone out there hates me. I even hate thinking that Al-Qaeda hates me. I think if they got to know me, they wouldn't hate me."
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Corporate Couch. If you enjoy the podcast, I would love for you to take 2 minutes out of your day to rate us 5 stars and write a review. Please join me next week to learn from another great leader sharing their professional journey and insights.